Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's Cabinet meeting. The question of the Queen Elizabeth Fields Challenge and the proposals to enter into a deed of dedication. Since this is a property issue, I shall ask Councillor Ajay Warner to introduce the paper.
This land is open space, and if a decision is made tonight, it will remain open space. The issue is whether a road or a cycleway or a footpath or anything should be placed there is a planning consideration. But it is important that in making a decision like this tonight, we do not preclude any future planning committee of this authority, local people through a neighbourhood development plan, or any other such body from making planning decisions based on planning evidence in the future. In making a decision tonight, nothing changes. No road is going to be built overnight. Indeed, it may never be built. And the neighbourhood development plan framework, the community chooses what gets built and where. Only if this site was agreed in the future would any access be required to it. And indeed, it may be that the community finds access that is better suited and more, and is in that case built instead of this road. So, though it is a planning matter, it is up to people of Whitchurch to choose where housing goes, whether this site is developed, and if this site is not put forward for development, as I say, the road may never be built. We are not, in my view, it would not be right, in my view, to limit the decisions of future residents of Whitchurch, future generations even, from making their own decisions on planning in the years ahead. This is about setting aside land for the possibility of a road, a cycle path, cycleway or footpath. It's about leaving options open, and for that reason I do move the decision notice as has been tabled in front of members.
First speaker that I have on my list here is Cathy Edwards.
I'll just pick up what the councillor has said. I thoroughly agree. It is up to the people of Whitchurch. It is actually an issue of land ownership and planning, and anything that happens would be subject to stringent planning tests, which is why I think that actually it should be a QE2 field. That's just from what you've said earlier. Today you're being asked to make two decisions. One is to dedicate land at Daniel Road as a QE2 field in tribute to Her Majesty the Queen for the Diamond Jubilee. As one of the founding members of Friends of the Field, I fully support this. The other part of the decision notice relates to the proposed exclusion of land from the dedication deed to secure vehicular access to the Knowlings, land that has been owned by the council and its predecessors for over 46 years. Officers, having failed to act in all that time, now wish to steal public recreation land instead of securing an adequate access elsewhere, should it even be needed. When the public voted to protect and dedicate Daniel Road, it was not envisaged that we could end up with even less recreation land than we currently enjoy, or that there was a road proposal that would effectively cut the community off from its open space. I question whether the author of the report before you has even inspected the land in question. Last week I sent to you all a copy of my letter to Prince William, patron of the QE2 Field Trust, and a copy of my presentation to the Overview Committee on the 6th of March. Officers appear to have overturned the outcome of that committee. What continues to concern me is that officers of this council, and most likely its legal team, allowed the public vote to go forward, yet must have known that the council's intention was always to reserve a swathe of land for an access road. If this is correct, then the council cynically misrepresented its real intentions, disrespectful to Her Majesty the Queen, and disingenuous to those this council represents. I would therefore urge that this Cabinet remove the second part of the decision notice and endorse the public vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so well to time. The second speaker is John Buckley.
In the late 19th century, 3,000 people met in the centre of Whitchurch, and they gained the right to be heard. The people of Whitchurch used another hard-fought right, which they won, and they used it to vote for Daniel Park as a QE2 field. Democracy and fair play. Last year, the council put forward a competition. The whole of Daniel Park, all 4.3 hectares of it, as detailed in the council's own documents. Local people voted on that as a means to celebrate our Queen's Jubilee. Now the officers want to change those rules. This was to be an occasion for celebration. It was for waving flags, for dignitaries in fine regalia, a legacy to celebrate our monarchy, something that would be marked forever. So what might you, our representatives, create instead? An extra 600 vehicle movements per day on the local roads, increased traffic danger, greater emissions, congestion, noise, property devaluation. And incredibly, we would end up with a smaller park than we have now. Is that what we voted for? Your officers cry in feeble mitigation, we haven't decided anything yet. The proposal will lead a full-scale blight on the area, an uncertainty, opening gates for costly compensation claims against you. You refuse to follow the terms of a democratic society, and you're refusing to act in a fair and moral way. If you agree to this despicable breach of trust, you will deserve a blue plaque. I hope the people of Whitchurch will commemorate not the Queen, but your disregard for local democracy forever. I ask you not to go down in history as a council who leaves such a blighted heritage and destroys what should have really been a wonderful celebration for our Majesty.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Mr. Paul Barber.
As a resident of Whitchurch and a local GP, I have several concerns, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to voice them. Though I appreciate the arguments about preserving every possible access route to a hypothetical future housing estate, I feel there are overwhelming reasons to honour the agreed proposal to dedicate the Daniel Field site in its entirety, rather than reserve a tract of land 20 metres wide that would seem wide enough for a motorway, and that takes up 1/5 of the width of the field when it's viewed from the Daniel Road side. And more than that if you account for the separation of the woodland belt from the main park, as well as that a 5.5 metre strip along the same Daniel Road side. Surely we don't want to also build a dual carriageway to the school. I realise you're not called upon today to decide the viability of a road through Daniel Park. However, I'm anxious that no decision is made tonight without consideration of its implications, introducing inappropriate levels of traffic around not just the park, but also 2 schools, a playground, a recreation ground, and the infamous Mitchell-Dever-Winchester Road junction. The roads near the primary school are already tortuous, and I'm acutely aware of this as a dad who walks his children to school. Secondly, consider the effect of a large road on the open space that is Daniel Park. There's an epidemic of obesity and heart disease now on its way in children. What a fantastic antidote to computer games to see kids leaping and hurling themselves around on their bikes and skateboards. There's a lot of talk about nudging or encouraging healthy behaviour by small influences. Building this large access road would be a nudge in the wrong direction. Though not prohibitive, it would discourage it through increased traffic and pollution. We should be doing all we can to ensure the protection of children's health. And lastly, what message would this send to the residents of Whitchurch and elsewhere? The way this process has been conducted appears to be undemocratic and riding roughshod over public opinion. A public ballot last year voted for the whole of this area to be protected, and a vote of your colleagues earlier this month supported the outcome of the ballot. So by voting to protect the whole of Daniel Park, you win a sense of fair play and restoration of public trust from Whitchurch residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mike Keane.
Good evening. I attended the committee meeting here 2 weeks ago and reported to you that Whitchurch Town Council and its residents were absolutely delighted in learning that we'd won the Queen Elizabeth II Fields Challenge. We were, really. I went on to say that Whitchurch Town Council and its residents were absolutely devastated to discover that hidden in the small print was a proposal for an option to leave a 20-metre strip for use as a road in the future, a width big enough for almost a 3-lane motorway. I know I was up there this afternoon measuring it. We were, though, delighted again with the committee's decision on the 6th of March to vote for an amendment. to the recommendations to exclude the 20-metre strip, or as I called it then, the road to nowhere, from the deed of dedication. 9.2 in your report confirms that. However, the Town Council and residents were devastated again to discover that the amendment doesn't appear in the recommendation of tonight's report. Mr. Chairman, members, I repeat what I said on the 6th of March. Whitchurch Town Council voted unanimously to oppose the proposal for an option to build this road to nowhere. Please listen to the people of Whitchurch and turn down the proposed vehicular access from the deed of dedication and retain all the land for continued recreational use only. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I have two further speakers, Councillors Watson and Councillor Parker.
Mr. Thomas is here with a petition from the residents of Alliston Way. I understood that notice had been given of that.
I'm sorry, but I haven't received any notice of that, so if we should have done, I don't know why.
Anyway, if this is my time, I'm going to get moving. Thank you, Leader. I'm here to ask you to agree to the recommendation of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as cited in paragraph 9.1 brackets 1 of the Cabinet report. My reasons for this are the retention of a 20-metre strip of land has three disadvantages. It would be a breach of trust with the people who took part in the ballot organised by Fields in Trust. It's unnecessary because there are other access points to the council's adjacent land, which is labelled WIT 10A in the Slough. And it's foolish because development using an access across the QE2 field from Alliston Way will never be approved by the community under the localism agenda. It's a breach of trust because the people of Whitchurch voted in the ballot on the understanding that the whole site, now known as Daniel Park, would be preserved forever as a Queen Elizabeth field. I now know that the council never signed the framework agreement for the QET Fields Challenge with Fields in Trust. Officers allowed the ballot to go ahead, knowing that the council wasn't legally committed to complying with the result. That was cynical and unworthy of the borough. Alliston Way is no better as an access to WIT 10A.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I'll stop the clock here, but do you actually have any evidence that they were cynical? Because you're making an allegation against an officer, and I think it is unfair to make an allegation against an officer without evidence.
The evidence is that the framework agreement was presented to the council by Fields in Trust. It wasn't signed, but the ballot went ahead.
But are you saying that that was, what evidence do you have that is a cynical approach? It implies that an officer was deliberately doing something underhand, and that I think is an unfair accusation to make against an officer.
Well, Leader, that's my judgment of the circumstances, which I found out by a Freedom of Information request.
I think you may wish to reconsider that in due course. I just like it noted that I don't think making accusations against officers is an appropriate thing to be doing at a cabinet meeting.
Well, Chairman, I'm sorry, but I corresponded extensively with the Chief Executive over this because I thought there are issues that the paid service should be dealing with. I'm going to refer to the review of the Slough in a moment. I wrote to the corporate director lamenting the fact that because all the decisions have been made by officers, including her, there was no one else who could be blamed. But I'll continue with what I have to say. Alliston Way is no better as an access than the existing alternatives. When consulted by our corporate director in the Slough call-in review, a county highways officer wrote, "I would have concerns about the impacts of a substantial new vehicular access to the site from this location." My judgment is it's insane. This council as landowner should be promoting a relief for Mitchell Ever Road. That's without prejudice to any future planning decisions. We're now in the era of localism and community involvement in planning. Other landowners and developers are trying to curry favour with the communities, but this council's delivering a slap in the face. If this strip of land is reserved to provide a road for 200 houses, that site will never be accepted by the community for development. So in the interest of this council's reputation for probity and of eventually obtaining best value from the adjacent site, I urge you to agree that the deed of dedication should be as it was defined at the time of the ballot.
Councillor Parker, you know the form.
Thank you very much, Leader. The Economic Prosperity and Performance Overview and Scrutiny meeting of the 6th of April 2012 voted in favour of a motion put forward by local councillor Keith Watts, seconded by myself. This was to make an amendment to the recommendation to Cabinet to secure the whole site for the dedicated park, not with an exclusion of a ribbon of land for access. So, Cabinet, I am disappointed to see that this recommendation is being ignored. Indeed, from what I can see of the report for tonight's meeting, the wording of the proposed and agreed recommendation has not been accurately reported in the Cabinet paper, only a note to it. So how can Cabinet members give fair consideration of the recommendation from the meeting of the 6th of April to hopefully influence their decision tonight?
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Since there were a couple of references to the Chief Executive, I don't know whether you wish to comment at all on any of the things that were said by Councillor Watts.
Chair, if I may, before I comment on that, just to say that I just had a word with the gentleman who has the petition. There was a misunderstanding at that end about the process, and I did suggest you might be lenient and allow a minute just for it to be presented after I've spoken. So for the records, I don't believe that the officer who was involved in the competition acted cynically in any way whatsoever. If there is an issue in the council, and I emphasise the word if, it might be to do with different parts of the organisation not working in sync on this matter, but I believe that arises from no more than misunderstandings and certainly not from any cynical approach. Councillor Watts has had correspondence with me, largely relating to the process post the competition, and I would accept from the correspondence I've had with Councillor Watts that there are learning points for the officers, and I did effect some changes in the process in terms of engagement with Councillor Watts as a result of the correspondence that he had with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Executive. In which case, let's go back to the petition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't catch your name, sir.
Barry Thomas.
Barry Thomas.
I'm a resident of Alston Way. I attended the meeting on the 6th of March 2012 and heard the discussion for and against the proposals for the retention of Daniel Park as a QE2 dedicated field. That decision to dedicate the field had already been made by this council. I listened to the democratic procedure and to the amendment put forward by Councillor Watts, the subsequent vote and the fact that the amendment was accepted, all due democratic procedures. I now found that this outcome may be overturned by one person. I present the Council with a petition, the heading read and subsequently signed by residents only of Alston Way, those who would be most affected by the retained land and subsequent road. All signatures are in favour of the land being retained in total and complete as the QE2 dedicated park, as originally agreed on the 6th of March here. Even if this road is not constructed, our properties will be blighted in perpetuity if this land is retained. The Council is a democratic elected body and should have the resolve to listen to those who elected them, as in this petition, and act in a democratic way. I submit the petition for your attention and subsequent explanation to your electorate if you fail in your duties to listen and act in a proper and considered manner to those who would be affected. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. Councillor Ajay Warner, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Leader. And first, I thank residents for taking the time to come this evening and explain their views. And my first comment would be, as I said earlier, though, that it's important we separate out land ownership and planning, because this is, as a landowner, we're taking a decision to leave options open. It may well come to nothing, and indeed, as Councillor Watts says, that if the people of Whitchurch don't want to develop the site going through the neighbourhood development plan, then there will be never a need for an access to that site anyway. Indeed, taking it a step further, if the people of Whitchurch did want to develop the site and they could find an alternative access, well, then there may well never be a need to use this access and sort of create a road or a cycleway or whatever. But I'm to that end, I must sort of just pick up on a few points that I've heard this evening. This land isn't being stolen, in that we're being very clear, and I've said at the outset, this will remain open space for as long as the people of Whitchurch want it to. Indeed, it will only be used if the site is developed. Again, separating out the land ownership and the planning sides of this debate. Second, the suggestion of increased traffic is indeed by its very nature, if you're building new homes, new residents will have cars. But again, this is a planning matter, and what we're doing here is to actually ensure that we're not blocking anyone else in the future from taking decisions in line with the planning system if they want to develop that site. I should say, of course, that there's been reference to the 20-metre strip. I understand why people have questioned that. Let me just explain where that's come about. It's to ensure that when a road is being built, the right the right width of the road can be created for access for emergency service vehicles and so on, which are set down. Equally, it's to ensure that there could be a footway or indeed a cycle path as well to allow children to go to school or anything else indeed. But in addition, it's to ensure that the work of building the road can be completed, to ensure any services that are required under the road can be laid, and also to ensure that the curve that would be necessary to get into the field in question of development could be created as well. So it's important that a reasonable strip of land is left open with the option, but it's not to say it will at all be sort of used in total. Indeed, a proportion of it may be used if there was ever a planning application that was accepted in the future. My last comment, Leader, would just be that, as Councillor Watts said, he said that this is all unnecessary because people will never choose this site for development, and indeed that's absolutely, and I fully support the Localism Act, the right of people to choose the planning through the planning process where they get houses built. So indeed, it is a matter that's down to local people, but that's on the planning side, and it's important, and I do stand by the decision notice, having heard all the arguments. It's important from a land owning perspective that we don't preclude a future planning decision. So I stand by the decision notice and do move it.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, do we have anything we wish to contribute? I shall then. It's a very difficult one, this. In fact, I think I've spent longer thinking about this one, for that matter, traipsing backwards and forwards across the field and the adjacent field, the Knowlings field, looking at it from all aspects of it. And I've done it more than once, so I've now seen the very fetching red sticks that are, that was you, was it? Well, it's actually very helpful because it does just show the width that's being considered there. And I would naturally, my gut feel would be to go with the local people and say it's your decision. You go the way that you want to go. But there's a problem in that I think if we had started this process by saying that we need to reserve a piece of land at the top of that, we would have had much less of a problem. It was the fact that we set off down a route and then changed along the way. Now, I would totally disagree with Councillor Watts over that. I don't think it was cynical in any way. In fact, the officer concerned is the least cynical person that I know. I would put it much more down to cock-up than conspiracy as a reason for doing it, where they should have, different bits of the council should have spoken to one another. But we do have to arrive at the right answer, not just for the moment, but for the long-term future. And by the long-term future, I mean by, your successors as residents of Whitchurch and what they may choose to do with the land at some point in time in the future. And to have either a right of access or just a right to be able to put something through, like drainage or sewers, to dig up the land and put that through, would be denied if this was a field in trust. Therefore, if you wanted to put anything on the land at the back of it, where, for instance, a school or something like that, you would have major problems even putting any form of communication through there. For instance, just a cycle path or a footpath to enable children to walk through from an estate of houses that have been built to get to the school, even though the access by road would be somewhere totally different. So I think to deny that possibility, and to say that that piece of land, therefore, behind it in the Knowlings is cut off there, I think might be a mistake which you would choose to regret in the long term. I say that in the knowledge that actually not one blade of grass is going to disappear, not one tree is going to disappear. The look of the field will be exactly the same in 6 months' time, in 9 months' time, since the field at the back is excluded from the development programme. It'll be the same in 10 years' time. And the choice about whether to change it will be a choice made by the people of Whitchurch themselves, not by this council, except in terms of endorsing it as a part of the planning process. So on that basis, whilst I have a lot of sympathy with local people wanting to feel that they're in charge of their own destiny, I actually think that on this particular case, what is being proposed will not have a radical effect in any way upon the amenity value of the land itself and its use for residents going forward. And therefore I would, in some ways reluctantly, come to a conclusion to support the recommendations. So members, if we are we agreed with the recommendations? Thank you. That concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you all very much indeed.